Morning, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session that we're going to have today. I am pleased to be presenting this Lunch and Learn session. Today we are reflecting on the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, our obligations then and now. And I'm very pleased to have three esteemed members of our panel here today to discuss the ADA. And before we do that, I'm going to do just some quick housekeeping. Please make sure that you keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit those questions to the host in our chat, and we will take those questions to our panelists. Again, we are now celebrating the 31st anniversary of the ADA. On July 26th of 1990, the ADA was signed under President George H.W. Bush. And 31 years later, we're now reflecting on the ADA. And again, I'm very pleased to have our panelists here today. And I'm going to start with our first of three panelists, Jennifer Sheehy. Jennifer Sheehy is the Deputy Assistant Secretary leading the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, U.S. Department of Labor. The mission of ODEP is to develop policy that increases job opportunities for youth and adults with disabilities. In 2016, she was also appointed by the President to the Ability One Commission. Prior to her current position, she spent 10 years at the U.S. Department of Education in many roles, including Active Director of the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, Acting Deputy Commissioner of the Rehabilitation Services Administration, and Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. Ms. Sheehy came to the Department of Education from the Presidential Task Force on Employment of Adults with Disabilities, where she was a senior policy advisor and served as a detail as associate director in the White House Domestic Policy Council. Before she joined the task force, she was vice president of the National Organization on Disability and director of its CEO Council. She earned a BA from Cornell University and graduated with honors from Georgetown University, where she received her MBA. While in graduate school, Ms. Sheehy worked in marketing research with Anheuser-Busch companies in St. Louis. Before graduate school, she also worked in marketing and management for Sheraton and Marriott. Ms. Sheehy has received many civic achievement awards, including the 2019 Presidential Rank Award, the Essential Women in Government Rising Leader Award, and the Diet Coke Glamour Magazine Women at Their Best Award. Today, she will be joined by her colleagues, Sylvia Calderon and Ann Hirsch, who I now introduce. Ann Hirsch is the Associate Director of the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, the leading national source of expert guidance on workplace accommodation and disability employment issues. Since 1986, JAN has been committed to serving the JAN organization and has held various titles. Beginning as a consultant, she became the associate manager in 1994, served as co-director in 2007, and was later appointed associate director. As a senior leadership partner, Ann directs all aspects of the service delivery side of the JAN organization, manages staff, and oversees daily operations, and provides national consultation and training regarding a broad range of disability employment, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and job accommodation issues. She serves as JAN Public Relations Liaison, leads the effort to collect accommodation and JAN follow-up data, coordinates all organizational training, facilitates strategic product development, and assists with the marketing. Ann has been instrumental in assisting with the development of various JAN resources, including the Workplace Accommodation Toolkit, the JAN Mobile Accommodation Solution, MASS, app, various Jan videos, and most recently, the Mygen Portal. Her interests include collective approaches in accommodation, educating employers and individuals with disabilities on the ADA interactive process, and exploring accommodation solutions for individuals with hearing loss and mental health conditions. Ann holds a Master of Science degree in Rehabilitation Counseling and Vocational Evaluation from West Virginia University and is a certified professional in disability management, CPDM. In 2006, she was awarded the Laddie R. Bell Distinguished Service Award by the West Virginia University College of Human Resources and Education in recognition of 20 years of national, regional, and local service to individuals with disabilities. Prior to establishing her career with Jan, Ann worked in private rehabilitation. Finally, we have Sylvia Calderon. She is a policy advisor on ODEP's employer policy team. There, she works to evaluate policy issues and barriers facing employees as they seek to recruit, retain, hire, and advance individuals with disabilities in the workplace. She also supports the creation and encourages the adoption and implementation of disability employment practices and policies that meet the needs of the private and public employers and individuals with disabilities. In December 2020, Sylvia finished her 8-month detail work at the Wage and Hour Division of FMLA in Section 14C, where she helped administer and enforce the Family First COVID Response Act paid leave requirements. She also addressed matters related to FMLA, FLSA, and Section 14C. Sylvia recently graduated from law school, where her experience and studies focused on public interest, direct representation, oral advocacy, writing, and research. Sylvia represented indigent defenders in misdemeanor cases from DC Superior Court, taught legal writing to inmates housed in Maryland's Jessup Correctional Institution, and advocated for Spanish-speaking women and children seeking asylum at South Texas Family Detention Center. Her work is directed towards advancing the rights of vulnerable groups and making a positive contribution to the community at large. Sylvia holds a Juris Doctorate from Georgetown University Law Center and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Florida Atlantic University. I have now introduced all of our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Sheehy with their presentation for today. Again, Jennifer, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. We're thrilled to be here today. We love interacting and learning from and sharing experiences with other public servants. We learn so much from our state official colleagues, and couldn't be more thrilled to have been invited to celebrate the ADA with you today. And I'm also privileged to be joined by my dear colleague, Sylvia Calderon, and longtime friend and colleague, Ian Hirsch. So we want this to be interactive in the sense that I know we have a lot of people, and we're grateful that you are all participating today. We will have time set aside for questions and answers, and I encourage you to ask any question that you want. We know that people have different experiences with disability, and some have not been in the field of disability employment for very long, or and in many cases, diversity that includes disability is kind of new, believe it or not. So please don't hesitate to ask us any questions. We want to help you incorporate people with disabilities throughout all of North Carolina's agencies, and we stand ready to do that today and in the future. So thank you again for inviting us. And not only are we celebrating the 31st anniversary of the ADA this year, but we are also celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. And in ODEP, the ADA really underpins nearly everything we do. Sylvia is going to do my slides for me. Thank you, Sylvia. So what is ODEP and what do we do? So we're the only non-regulatory agency that promotes policies and coordinates with employers in all levels of government to increase workplace success for people with disabilities. And that includes state governments, which is why we are delighted to be invited today. We're a sub-cabinet level agency within the Department of Labor. We don't administer the ADA employment provisions. The EEOC and the Department of Justice are involved in that work, but the spirit of that law really infuses all the work that we do, because our goal is to ensure that all Americans with disabilities can prepare for and succeed in employment. And as I said, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We were established by Congress in 2001. I happen to have been a staffer on a task force back then that envisioned, dreamed up ODEP, and then worked with Congress to authorize ODEP. So I'm like so excited to see that we've come 20 years with our agency, and I'm honored to be part of the leadership in that agency now at this really critical time. And next slide, please. I want to take a minute to talk about our current priorities. So one is to ensure a disability-inclusive COVID response and recovery, what we're calling Recover into Inclusion. And that's what we're going to talk more with you about today. The second, which is critically important, is ensuring racial equality in disability policy and vice versa. So we are looking at our disability employment policy and making sure that equity is part of that analysis, but we also want to make sure that people with disabilities are involved in the racial equity conversations nationally. The prevalence of disability is higher, of course, in communities of color or those underrepresented groups. So it's really critically important that disability discussions and disability policy is part of those national conversations. The third is supporting workers who have mental health conditions and promoting mental health friendly workplace policies and practices. Mental health is critically important right now, and again, the rate of mental health conditions or people that are experiencing mental health trauma is much higher in the pandemic. The CDC recently came out with new statistics and found that 41% of Americans, of working age Americans, are experiencing new mental health conditions because of the pandemic and other factors related to the pandemic. So we want to make sure that employers and people with disabilities or people with mental health conditions have access to the support that they need to stay employed. Employment is a recovery strategy. That's how we approach it. And it's so important that people are able to remain in their jobs or return to jobs that can be a stabilizing influence when they're experiencing mental health conditions. The fourth is making sure that people with disabilities are able to access the new opportunities in the clean or green energy sector and in other high growth industries, those that are being supported right now, and those that are the jobs of the future. And finally, we are particularly concerned about young people with disabilities and how the pandemic may have affected or interrupted their early career launch. So we know that it's tough for young people when they're transitioning from school to employment at any time, but during the pandemic, all of those services that young people with disabilities may have access to when they're in high school or even college, they need to be connected to supports and services as adults so that they can really launch successful careers. So hard during the pandemic, and something that we're paying close attention to so that we know what those new barriers are and that we can help them bridge this time and launch their careers successfully. I remember myself when I acquired a disability. So I had a spinal cord injury in 1994, and just the thought of what it was going to take for me to continue to work and not knowing what kind of services were out there. I, thank goodness, was connected to a vocational rehabilitation counselor, part of the state grant program. And again, I'm very, very grateful to my counselor. But without that person, I wouldn't have known what kind of supports and services were available to me so that I could get back on my feet, so to speak, even though I'm using a wheelchair, and continue on my career path with those necessary supports. So with that, I want to talk more about the first one, inclusive response and recovery, or recovering into inclusion. So from a very general basis, we're looking across the country and with working with employers to ensure that people with disabilities can be part of that initial response and recovery. It's important. One of the things that resonates with our office in the President Biden in his priorities is building back better. So we do have an opportunity as we transition back into the workplace and as restaurants reopen, as the businesses that weren't able to operate in the pandemic reopen, that people with disabilities are included in that recovery. And we have lots of tools now, new technology tools, new accommodation ideas, just a new experience because of the pandemic that can work together to help people with disabilities be successful in any job. And we're excited to work with you all to support that employment. So what are some of those ways that we can help in the recovery? One is, of course, assisting those with disabilities who lost jobs, ensuring workers with disabilities have access to the accommodations and support, including those who are still experiencing symptoms from COVID that may impact their ability to work. Helping employers and workers understand the intersection between the new CDC, OSHA, and HHS, Health and Human Services, Safety and Health Guidelines, and the ADA, promoting best practices for workplace mental health, as we discussed, and educating about accessible telework and what that means and how companies can support it. Next slide, please. So one thing I talked about is our office being a policy office, but part of the policy work that we do is getting the word out. And when we test and develop policies, we look for effective strategies that can be scaled in order to promote workplace success for people with disabilities. So we want to make sure that we are reaching every person who could benefit from those services or that can have a role in providing those accommodations and services for people with disabilities. And part of that is taking leadership in the National Disability Employment Awareness Month celebration, which of course is held every year in October. ODEP produces the theme or releases the theme each year. We usually do that in May so that communities, employers, schools, agencies, states can plan their celebration and their activities. This year's theme is America's Recovery, Powered by Inclusion. And we highly encourage the state agencies to take part. You can go to our website at dol.gov/NDEAM and get ideas for your own activities and how you can celebrate October. We also have something we call the Campaign for Disability Employment. And the CDE is really a nice series of public service announcements that we've been doing for several years. They are all based on a theme. We have a mentoring public service announcement. We have a return to work PSA. We have one that talks about all the identities that someone with a disability brings to their workplace and how that can support a business success and others. These PSAs have been really popular and have been rated in the top 1% of Nielsen ratings. We also have discussion guides, so you can use them for training, and we have accompanying stories about the individuals featured in the PSA. All the PSAs feature real people in real businesses, and I encourage you to look at those. We're in production for our 5th PSA. It is going to focus on mental health and at work, and we should be releasing that sometime in the next couple of months. You can find all of these materials at whatcanyoudocampaign.org, and I particularly like those because I think they show the real faces of disability and what it takes to be successful in several different types of workplaces. Next slide, please. So one of our favorite initiatives is called our State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and SEED, which I don't know about North Carolina state agencies, but the feds love their acronyms, and SEED helps state and local policymakers look at, find, and adopt policies that encourage greater workforce participation of individuals with disabilities. We work with several what we call intermediary partners. So these are organizations that have state legislators or governors or officials as members. These include the Board of Hispanic Caucus Chairs, the Council of State Governments, the National Governors Association, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Western Governors Association, Women in Government, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and others. So the spirit behind SEED is helping state and local governments and policymakers adopt policies that encourage greater workforce participation. We work with more than 7,000 legislators, 50 governors, 1,400 mayors, and 30 county governments on topics such as accessible transportation that supports employment, or what we call state as a model employer, and that's what we're going to talk about today in a little more detail, is how states can be an employer of choice for people with disabilities. But we know when we encourage states to be model employers that the feds have to be model employers too. And so ODEP does work with all of our federal agency partners and the EEOC and OPM to help those federal agencies hire, recruit, retain, and advance people with disabilities. So with that, I am going to turn it over now to my wonderful colleague, Sylvia, who, as you heard, is an early career team member with ODEP and someone I feel very privileged to work with and very lucky that she decided to start her career off with ODEP. So Sylvia, take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and get the chance to talk to you. Again, my name is Sylvia Calderon, and I am a policy advisor with the employer team at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. I have a disability. However, my disability hasn't stopped me from pursuing any of my goals. One of them was always working for the advancement of the rights of underrepresented individuals. I found my way to the federal government and to ODEP through my school's Office of Disability Services and the workforce recruitment program that we also call WRP. I wanted to mention that WRP program because it's an effective program that has been connecting successful students or recent graduates with federal agencies, and also because it may be replicated at other levels of the government. So the WRP is an effort sponsored by the Department of Labor and the Department of Defense. And this is a recruitment and referral program that connects federal employers nationwide with highly motivated college students and recent graduates with disabilities who are eager to prove their skills in the workplace through summer internships or permanent jobs. I found out about this program through my school's Office of Disability Services. So after graduating from law school, I took the opportunity that ODEP offered me and started helping my team in developing and influencing disability employment-related policies and practices. So if you or anyone that you know is interested in working for the federal government, the WRP is one way to get an interview with a federal agency and potentially get an internship or a job. Another program that I would like to talk about is FEED. FEED stands for Federal Exchange on Employment and Disability. And as Jennifer noted earlier, we work with all levels of government, from local to state to federal. For federal, the emphasis is on making the federal government a model employer, and Section 501 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, often called the Rehab Act. For anyone unfamiliar, Section 501 prohibits discrimination against qualified applicants and employees with disabilities and requires federal agencies to take proactive steps or affirmative action to recruit, hire, retain, and advance qualified individuals with disabilities in their workforces. The key channel through which we advance disability inclusion in the federal workforce is the Federal Exchange on Employment and Disability, or FEED. FEED is an interagency working group focused on information sharing, best practices, and collaborative partnerships designed to make the federal government a model employer of people with disabilities. Membership is open to federal employees. at any level whose job duties involve inclusion of people with disabilities, including recruitment, hiring, retention, and advancement. The main way to participate in FEED is through its quarterly meetings. We manage FEED in collaboration with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, and the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. Together with Odep, these agencies comprise what we call the EO work group. In addition to helping steer FEED, this work group works together to ensure that federal agencies have the tools and resources they need to deliver on the federal government's commitment to disability inclusion. The report featured on the slide is one example of a recent FEED report. It's called The Federal Government as a Model Employer of People with Disabilities, Research-Based Practices and Strategies. You may notice that it is published under the auspice of our Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, or EARN. Among many other things, EARN assists in managing FEED and the EO work group. EARN is a free resource for employers seeking to recruit, hire, retain, and advance qualified people with disabilities. It's funded by Odep and conducts research and provides training and resources on how to foster a disability-inclusive workplace culture. EARN's website address is easy to remember. It's askearn.org. If you go to it, you will find the report I just mentioned in the private slide, as well as you will find also a lot of other resources for private as well as federal and state government employers. Now, EARN is one of two other funded technical assistance centers for employers. Earlier, Jennifer mentioned that the other one, the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. And next, from Jan is going to talk about Jan's work and accommodations in the context of the ADA. But before she does that, Jennifer and I are happy to answer any questions you might have about our work at Odep.
Yes, and thank you so much, Sylvia. I also wanted to mention one of the reasons that we wanted to highlight FEED today and our Employer Assistance Resource Network, EARN, is because so many of the successful practices that we've captured and we have materials for implementing can be used at the state level too. So you are all helping your agencies with recruitment, hiring, managing employees and staffing and talent, and we want to help you in whatever way possible to incorporate people with disabilities in the state agency workforces. So please take a look at the FEED work, what we have found successful, and the state work, and also resources for employers. Many of all of those may be pertinent to your work, and we would be happy to follow up with you later individually if you have questions that come up. So if there are any questions now before we turn it over to Ann, we're happy to take those. We will also have questions and answers later in the program.
I just wanted to piggyback on what was stated by our panelists with Job and EARN specifically. I do teach the half-day course for ADA, and I find myself using those two sites as references for anyone that's in my class. And also within OSHR, when we were looking at how we would have our reasonable accommodation request forms, we did go to Jan and rely on Jan a lot for getting those forms out to our HR directors, and they consulted with us to do that. So again, those resources are very helpful when you're looking at any type of accommodation for someone with a disability. And I just wanted to reiterate that and say thank you.
Great. I'm so glad to find out it's useful. It's nice to get that kind of feedback. Well, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Ann then, and she can talk about Jan.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Wendy, for including Jan in this event as well. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to all you people across the great state of North Carolina. I've got family in Raleigh and had the pleasure of visiting just a couple weeks ago. Well, I'm here today to give you a bit more about the Job Accommodation Network. As you heard, we're funded through ODEP, and we provide information on all things related to workplace accommodation. That would be information on what accommodation options there may be for a situation as it's described to us, how to talk to an employee or even a manager about the need to implement effective accommodation, what the ADA or may say related to the accommodation in question. We provide practical guidance on a case-by-case basis to help you move through the accommodation process. On the side, we also have a resource for people with disabilities who are looking to become self-employed or improve a self-employment venture they may be actively a part of. So if you have working with individuals who are looking to do things related to self-employment, we can also be a good resource for you. We're located in Morgantown, West Virginia. We're part of West Virginia University. And I know there are a lot of mountaineers down there in the great state of North Carolina as well. Who can use anyone can. Our primary users are employers, typically from HR or a D&I, Diversity Inclusion Office, but we also hear from managers and supervisors as well. Individuals with disabilities make up about the other half of our users, and these are people with all types of medical conditions, health conditions. Some feel they are a person with a disability. Some people are new to the situation and are really trying to understand how the ADA can be of benefit to them. We also hear from rehabilitation professionals and attorneys, other medical professionals as well. Because we're funded by ODEP, we are indeed free. We truly are your tax dollars at work. We're national. We serve the entire country from our location in Morgantown, and we're also confidential. While we will ask for names, you don't have to provide it. We'll speak to anyone whether they want to remain anonymous or not. We do ask that people provide names because we do take notes, and we find that especially employers may be calling us back as they move through the accommodation process. We have a very experienced staff, a small staff, but quite experienced. The consultants you will be speaking with all have at least a master's level education. We look for people from a variety of different fields. Mine is in vocational rehabilitation, as you heard. We also have people with backgrounds in speech pathology, industrial labor relations, ergonomics, psychology, special education, just a real variety of backgrounds in our staff and experience. So at JAM, our goal is to meet you where you are in the process, whether you're trying to accommodate somebody for the first time or whether you've been working with somebody for years and something has changed either in your workflow, that happened quite a bit in the last year, I imagine, or something has changed in somebody's health condition. We know how important it is to get accommodations in place as quickly as you can, so we try to help you meet your timelines. When you do contact us, you'll get to speak with somebody either right away or within the next day of your initial contact. We assist in that interactive process. On occasion, employers will want to get online with their employee so that we can talk through some things related to the accommodation process or perhaps with the manager as well. We try to give targeted technical assistance. When we're referring to assistive technologies or products or services, we're going to try to get you the resources within your area. And we provide comprehensive resources. We're not here to tell you that this is the specific accommodation that you must put in place. We're here to give you as many options as we can come up with so that you can make the most informed decision to implement that effective accommodation. Again, we maintain confidentiality while we ask for names, and employers, we don't provide that information. If you go to our website, you'll notice you're not going to see many names of companies. There might be a few exceptions where they've given us permission to do so, but we don't release company or individual names to anyone, not even Odep. So our goal is to work as your partner to enable you to hire and retain talented people with disabilities. What I want to do now is talk about a few of our resources that some were mentioned previously. I'll just get into a little bit more detail. Our website is also very easy to remember. It's askjan.org. On it, you'll find a number of very useful tools. One of our more popular is our A to Z of disabilities and accommodations, where you'll find listings related to accommodations, specific disabilities, workplace functions, specific limitations, as well as employment topics. And each time you click, you'll go a little bit deeper and get more detailed information on the specific topic. We have over 300 publications related to accommodation issues and disability employment. We do training. We have a webcast series. We have a number of just-in-time training modules, and then we do individual trainings with specific companies or other organizations as well. I did want to touch briefly on our workplace accommodation toolkit that was mentioned earlier. The toolkit is a free, comprehensive online resource for employers seeking to move beyond basic compliance with the ADA in order to create more disability-inclusive workplaces. It provides guidance and resources for developing or updating accommodation policies and processes while leveraging the best proven practices available to date. We've developed this over years. It's a living document. We're constantly adding to it through a number of different focus groups with employers and vendors of services. And that's one place where you can find company names. At the end of our toolkit, we do list those who helped us develop it. There were more, those whose attorneys would allow them to list that they helped us develop it. It contains actionable policies and processes, a suite of accommodation forms that were mentioned earlier, a number of training presentations and role-play videos, focusing on the accommodation and interviewing process. All of those come with an accompanying PowerPoint with talking points so that you can use them yourselves in training. It also includes the best and emerging practices for creating an inclusive workplace for people with disabilities across the entire employment life cycle. We have what we call them drawers. We used to have the old Sears-looking red model toolkit as our visual, but then we kind of upgraded and changed. We have a drawer for recruiting and hiring managers, one for supervisors and managers, one for the reasonable accommodation subject matter experts. Our latest drawer is related to information technology team members, and then we also have one for employees with disabilities and their allies. So I encourage you to check it out. I think you'll find a number of helpful resources and ideas about how you can improve and make your workplace more inclusive for people with disabilities. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly was one of our newest tools that we rolled out in January of this year. Our website is pretty daunting. It's got a lot of information, and we heard it over the last few years from people that, I just wish I could have my own individual private little Jan website, because there are certain things that I know I'm going to use, and it'd be easier just to get them. So we created the Mygen Portal. It's a place where you can organize all of your important Jan documents in your own mini site. And you can take the stress out of constantly surfing, and allows you to work smarter and faster. What we've heard that some companies do is they create a vanity account that they share. The system allows you to, well, first of all, you have to create an account. All it takes is an email, and then you create your own password. If you have a vanity email that coworkers can share, the system allows you to take notes with your documents, so that you could put notes about how a specific document might be used during your accommodation process, or just other things that are important to you as an organization. So please check out the Mygen Portal if you have a chance. What I wanted to do now is just talk a little bit about the long COVID and the ADA. As Jennifer had mentioned earlier, it is one of their priorities. A question, as you can imagine, we're getting a lot of questions related to COVID and post-COVID syndrome, or also known as long COVID. Is it considered an ADA disability? Certainly the EEOC has not come out and said it definitely is. It certainly could be. We're not certain yet, but it certainly is possible. As you know, that definition is broad. Some people may have difficulty working in the same way they did before they had COVID-19, and even if it is temporary, it could still be considered a disability if limitations are severe enough. Some of the symptoms and limitations that we're hearing about, they really can vary. Not everybody, of course, has all of this, and they can experience them at different levels. Shortness of breath with exertion, extreme fatigue, brain fog, similar to somebody who might be going through some chemo treatment, insomnia, tachycardia, or that abnormally rapid heartbeat, joint pain and body ache, and that can affect different parts of the body, as well as headaches. Those are some of the main symptoms we're hearing about. And as you can understand and expect, some of these may make it difficult to do work in the same way you had done previously. And accommodations can vary, of course, depending on the specific limitation. One of the more common that we hear about would be the flexible scheduling and flexible rest breaks, allowing somebody maybe to take more frequent rest breaks throughout the day, still working the same amount of hours, but more frequent, shorter rest breaks. Seeing what you can do to reduce physical exertion, assuming the person is back into the workforce, or actually, many people never left and could not do that telework. Reduced physical exertion can move their workstation. They don't have to travel as far to get to it, if that would be making a difference. Job restructuring to remove marginal duties, or how and when essential duties are performed. So looking at thinking outside the box a little bit and looking at doing work a little bit differently. We get a lot of questions and hear a lot about alternative mask options for people who can't wear masks. Reducing triggers in an environment. For some, perhaps the lighting in an environment might cause and contribute to the headaches and making them worse and turning them into migraines. So can you adjust lighting? Time off for treatment, whether that's a chunk of time or an hour a week for some type of therapy. Providing uninterrupted work time where the person's phone does not ring, they don't have to check emails, where they can simply focus, and that can sometimes help with that brain fog issue. There are a number of different memory aids and tools, as well as noise-canceling headphones and headsets that people can wear if noise is an issue. Providing a quiet space, and of course, extending telework or allowing someone to telework. We also have seen a lot related to providing ergonomic equipment that can oftentimes help with some of the body aches and pains, as well as other conditions that have developed. And a big issue, and we all went from working in an office to teleworking in my office as well during this pandemic, and had to make sure that people's accommodations followed them home as they needed them. So it's really a number of different issues that we can help employers talk through and work through to get and achieve successful and effective accommodation. I wanted to highlight a number of our resources. A lot of what I've was just pulling from is mentioned in these articles. We do have a COVID page that we developed last March and constantly been adding to it. In the last couple of months, we added accommodating employees who have COVID-related symptoms, as well as the COVID long haulers and the ADA, as well as some guidance on requesting and negotiating accommodations during this pandemic. Again, wanted to point out our A to Z. That's one of aspects of our website that people say they find most useful. Highlighting the accommodation solutions for executive functioning deficits. It's something that we're seeing, especially with the brain fog and memory issues that people are using more frequently. And of course, making telework work, something that we've, several have struggled and several found that it really worked out very well and very successfully. And in it, we refer to some other great documents that other programs of ODEP, like PEAT, have created related to the topic of accessibility and telework. And then again, accommodation strategies for returning to work, because not everybody could work remotely, and a lot of people are not going to be working remotely. So I said that there are a number of different ways you can contact us. You can submit an Ask Jan on Demand form. You can email us directly. On our website, we have a big red live chat button where you can chat with one of our staff immediately between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can call and leave a voicemail message, and we will call you back that same day, or email you to set up a specific time to talk. Within the next 6 weeks, we hope to have our phones back to normal operation. You can also connect with us on social media through Facebook or Twitter. And with that, I am going to open it up to questions.
Hi, I have a question. I actually have a two-part question, and I hope it doesn't sound too rambly, but you all shared so much information, and I just have all these things that I want to ask you. The first question I have is, and it's for any of you, when we hear politicians speak about the issues that are faced by Americans, we rarely ever hear mention of individuals with disabilities. I mean, unless we're talking about, you know, the ADA anniversary, or we're acknowledging the Disability Employment Awareness Month. How do we change this to ensure that people with disabilities and their needs aren't being overlooked, but are and instead they're included in these high-profile, very consequential political settings? That's part one of my question. I'll just hold the second part. It kind of ties into it.
I'll take a stab at that, Regina. Thanks for asking. That's why ODEP was created, because Congress realized and advocates realized that people with disabilities and their concerns need to be part of all labor policy, not an afterthought or not a separate conversation. So the problem that you're raising today, what we found is explaining that 23% of Americans, working age Americans, say they have a disability. That's a huge number. So it's not a number that can be ignored when you're discussing anything, really, you know, healthcare policy, employment policy, when you're talking about workforce development. And I think part of it is that, and this is just my Jennifer Sheehy personal opinion, part of it has to do with unconscious bias that we're talking about in the country right now, and that people are, when they grow up, they have their own image of disability and own experiences with disability, and don't realize the diversity of disability in citizens. So that it could be anything from someone with diabetes or a back condition or a spinal cord injury who uses a wheelchair like I have, or someone who's blind, has a mental health condition, has autism, or an intellectual disability. It's just a huge variety of different identities and factors that make up the disability community, but the disability community is so large that disability issues really need to be part of those conversations. And I think explaining how, especially, in a workforce, employers, agencies, they already have people with disabilities that may not be identifying because they don't feel like they're going to get the support if they ever needed them. But making it clear when you're hiring someone, no matter who they are and whether or not you know they have a disability, making sure that every person as they onboard knows what the accommodation process is and what return to work type programs the business or agency has is going to go very far to show that you support employees no matter what happens to them in the course of their life. Every single person, if they live long enough, will experience disability. So it's just, I think part of it is a matter of explaining and understanding just the makeup of all of our citizens and how prevalent and disability is in your work life, in your families, in your communities, and making sure that those policy issues do recognize that community and that diversity of community. So that is a rambling answer. You talked about a rambling question. How's that for a rambling answer? And I'll let my colleagues Sylvia or Ann add anything that they want.
I think you covered it extremely well, as usual, Jennifer.
I'll also mention that our state exchange on employment and disability is a way for state legislators who care about disability to get disability into those conversations. So if there are those of you who want to be part of that, let us know as well.
I think that was a great answer because you sort of answered part of what I was going to ask you, and you enabled me to kind of expand what I wasn't even thinking about. But you reminded me of someone I heard speak at a conference. This was several years ago, and it was really an eye-opening experience for me because he said it was one for him. And what he did was it was a diversity and inclusion type conference. And he shared that he acquired a disability late in his adult life and that he had to learn about that, what he called a whole new world. He had to learn about that when this hit him, and that he felt that he was cheated out of information that he could have known about and been more aware of. And considering what you shared about the pandemic with regard to mental health, and also thinking about all those people in the military and the armed forces who are now included in, what really is the largest minority group, should we be thinking about messaging a different way that, putting it out there that anyone can become a member of this group, like that gentleman shared at the conference, depending on the life circumstances? And shouldn't we be more concerned about those type of initiatives? And I don't know, I just want your thoughts on that, because that not only would affect me if it happened to me, it would affect my daughter and other members of my family. Should we be kind of looking at it that way?
I think you're right. I totally agree with you that we do try to just express in a number of different ways that people might not identify as having a disability, but they are certainly eligible. Many more people are eligible for the protections under the ADA because they have a disability and a qualifying disability and may not even know it. One of the things we do in our own messaging, and I know Ann does this too with Jan, is that we try to get the word out through non-disability channels. We sometimes don't even use the term disability. So, for example, when we are talking about how an employer can support those with mental health conditions in the workplace and what supports someone who has a mental health condition might use to effectively work, sometimes we don't use the term disability right away because people don't necessarily identify one condition with a disability. We try to kind of bring them in slowly so then they do realize that they're part of a bigger community that can provide that support when they need it, and that there are many, many programs, services, and civil rights and employment rights laws that can help them out when they need it. But sometimes that messaging, that initial messaging, so that they identify with something that they claim like a mental health condition, but maybe don't identify with disabilities, we try to do messaging that will reach anyone in any way that they feel comfortable. And the same thing we've been doing for people who are experiencing symptoms from COVID or long COVID, as many people call it. We don't automatically or right away use the term disability. We say, in fact, our secretary is about to do several radio spots to make sure that people who are experiencing those conditions know that they may be eligible for rights in the workplace and supports and accommodations and services. We don't use the term disability in those initial spots, but certainly when they go to our website, they will see that what they're experiencing may qualify as a disability. So it's a matter of trying lots and lots of messaging angles, and I totally agree with you. I think there's no right answer, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
I would love to share them. I have ideas that go on for days, and it sometimes gets me in trouble, but not with my job, just in my personal life.
Sure.
But and I promise I'll just have one more question. I would rather other people ask because I could ask you questions all day. But I wanted to ask real quick, just based on what you shared, do you think there needs to be changes or improvements in the way we interpret or implement disability rights laws? Might that help people better understand the application of the law? Because a lot of times people just don't know what they don't know, and sometimes the changes that are needed won't happen just because people aren't clear on what they should be doing. Might that be another area?
Yes, I think it is a matter of educating as many people as possible, and again, using as many communication channels as people use. So when we're communicating and trying to help young people understand that they may have rights because of a disability or condition or something that might impact their ability to work, then we would use completely different channels than those we used to use 20 years ago when we were trying to get the word out. The federal government typically doesn't do a very good job with marketing or educating its programs or services. So we're trying to improve that too. I can't say we're there 100% yet, but any ideas that anyone has for how we can better educate employers, supervisors, workers with disabilities, people who, family members, people who could use those programs, services, and laws, we're happy to get feedback.
Thank you very much. Wendy,
Yes.
I don't know if there are other questions, but...
Yes, I have a question from the chat. Is it required for an employer to provide ergonomic equipment for a teleworker, like a work desk and chair, specifically when the employee has a note from their medical provider? Employers can provide this equipment at the work site, but is it required to upfit their home with this equipment?
Good question. I'm going to let Ann tackle that one.
Okay, I'm trying to make sure I'm off of mute. I'm sorry about that. I think an employer needs to consider it. The EEOC has not come down and said yes, they absolutely have to provide it, but it would have to be considered, and it's going to depend on what the employer already does provide, and maybe the longevity of it, of the situation. If whoever's asking the question, if you want to email me, or maybe I can try to find a way to put a document link in the chat here that might help talk about some of the intricacy of that question. But it really, unfortunately, isn't a clear blanket absolutely yes or absolutely no. It's going to depend on specifics of the situation. And first of all, does the person meet the definition of a person with a disability? What equipment does the employer already provide? And is it absolutely necessary? Even though somebody is asking for one specific tool or item as an accommodation, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the employer has to provide. The choice of that accommodation is the employer's, as long as it is effective. So it's an opening of a discussion. And get that interactive process going. And I'm going to go back on mute, and if I can find a document, I'll put it in the chat box. If not, then you can email me.
And I want to kind of expand on one point that Ann made. The obvious accommodation, like say someone is asking for some big piece of equipment or a personal reader or something, the accommodation that someone immediately thinks of might not be the best accommodation. And that is definitely a good reason to call Jan. And I'll give you an example. We had someone who needed reader services or thought he needed full-time reader services. But when we were able to contact Jan and find and talk through the job the person was doing and what he thought he needed a reader for, we found that an accommodation for a really interesting technology that provided a virtual assistant when the person needed it, and that is not, for the whole 8-hour day. So that turned out to be the effective accommodation that both the employee and the supervisor found just in talking with Jan when they were exploring options, and it turned out to be a far less expensive accommodation than hiring a full-time reader for 8 hours every day. So that's just one example, but Jan can provide so many different options, and their consultants, I've used them so many times myself, are really incredible.
Well, I'm very glad that, we have people that are having questions in the chat. I have a question. You hit on the point that there are 23% of working age Americans that have a disability. And I know here within OSHR, we are constantly looking at ways to make our employees feel more comfortable in disclosing any disability that they have. We have recently gone and updated our information so that they can go and voluntarily self-identify within our some of our systems that we have here available to our employees. But I just wanted to get from your perspective, what are some other things that we could possibly do to assist employees in possibly disclosing a disability if they have not done so far?
That's a really good question. We have lots of materials on self-identification, and one of the reasons for that is because federal contractors, fully 25% of the jobs in this country are federal contracts. Federal contractors have a new obligation, well, I guess it's not so new anymore, as of 2015, 2016, to show progress towards meeting 7% of their workforce with people with disabilities. So people with disabilities need to make up 7% of their workforce. So self-identification was a critical issue for them. So some of the ideas, and I would say for the full package of ideas and some examples of what companies and agencies have done, go to askEarn.org. That's our Employer Assistance Resource Network, and they have lots of materials on self-identification campaigns. But some of the things that work are getting senior leadership that have different disabilities or underlying conditions that might not be apparent to talk about those, to talk openly about accommodation, remind supervisors and employees that several times during the year that those accommodations are available, that you value everybody's contribution, everything that makes up a person's several identities, including disability, that when somebody discloses a disability so that you can basically count them, that doesn't mean that they're disclosing it. They don't need to disclose it when they do self-identification to their supervisor unless they need an accommodation. But just being able to count the number of people with disabilities in an organization helps the organization better serve its own workers. And so explaining that you want to provide the supports and services that make everyone successful, and that's a good reason to identify so that you know what the makeup is in an organization, then that goes a long way as well. But again, it's so much about messaging, and we do have lots of ideas and examples on askEarn.org. So thank you for asking that.
I would just like to add the importance of training, making sure your supervisors are in the know and understand your policies and processes about disclosure, whether it's self-identification or a reasonable accommodation request. We hear a lot of confusion about the two, that the fact that somebody is self-identifying does not mean they're requesting an accommodation, but supervisors may not always know that. And then we also hear the opposite, supervisors not even realizing or recognizing what a request for accommodation is, since an individual doesn't have to be real formal. They don't have to say, I'm expressing my right in relation to the ADA and requesting reasonable accommodation. They simply can say, I'm having trouble doing my job, I've got a change in medication, and I'm having some side effects of it. That's the start of that interactive process. So just making sure that you have good training and repeated training for managers and supervisors.
Thank you so much for answering that question, because that's something that I feel like we're grappling with throughout the year, and looking at different ways that we can look at encouraging employees to self-disclose. But I also have another, well, a point that I would like to make that would possibly lead to a question, which is within the state of North Carolina, we are an employment first state. So we really do, like you said, look at how we can actively recruit, retain, and hire individuals with disabilities. And we work, OSHR works in conjunction with vocational rehab within DHHS. And so I would just like to take this moment to bring up those DHHS's Vocational Rehabilitative Services Division at this time, and also OSHR's Recruitment Services Division, so that we could just talk about those programs that we have. So if we have someone from those divisions, if you would like to say something really quickly, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do so. But we are an employment first state, and I just wanted you to know that. I mean, you probably do, but we do actively recruit, retain, and we'll work to recruit, hire, and retain employees that have disabilities.
It sounds like you might not have someone from your vocational rehabilitation state agency, but again, I want to put a plug in on just a grateful thank you, because the VR counselor that I worked with was the reason that I was able to go back to business school and just start a career. I didn't even know after I had a spinal cord injury that people with spinal cord injuries could work. I mean, this was 1994, so I didn't have much experience, but it's incredible what some of those counselors can do, and they can help you raise the expectations you even have of yourself. They can also do workplace assessments or come to an agency if someone acquires a disability or you're hiring someone through the VR system, because they're great sources of candidates as well. And congratulations for being an employment first state too, Wendy.
Thank you. That is something that we're very proud of, and we are constantly working to do things to collaborate with DHHS and other agencies in order to fulfill the goals of Employment First. And even throughout this pandemic, we've been coming up with creative ways to do so by having virtual job fairs or different informative webinars for people with disabilities. So we've been working to do those things to keep individuals that have disabilities engaged in our hiring processes, and hopefully they will in turn view the state of North Carolina as an employer of choice for individuals with disabilities. So that is something that we actively collaborate to do. So I just wanted to say that in combination with the tools that your agency provides for us, we're able to do that. And we also are able to take some of those things out to our local government agencies as well, because I do ADA training for the local government agencies. And we also have other activities that involve local government throughout the year. So we try to collaborate not only on a state agency level, but local government agency level as well.
That's fantastic.
Now, one thing I know we talked about the long COVID and how that may eventually become a disability, but I wanted to see if at all, if you knew that if you've seen an uptick or an increase in people that are requesting accommodation because of the pandemic.
So we have an initiative called the Retaining Employment and Talent After Illness Injury Network, RETAIN, another good acronym. And that initiative operates in 5 states. It's interesting because they have seen a huge uptick for people who are seeking out services due to COVID. And that initiative connects physicians or healthcare professionals, employers, and the worker to ensure that they have what they need to get back to work as quickly as they can. But many of their new participants are in that situation because of COVID. And Anne, maybe you want to talk about the number of COVID questions you're getting or questions related to COVID.
Absolutely. Anecdotally, I can tell you that employers are telling us, yes, they're getting a lot more requests for accommodation, specifically related to, more specifically now related to employers who are returning to their workplace and individuals with a variety of different health conditions that are hesitant to do so for various reasons. You know, we saw our first real kind of questions about people who had COVID or had COVID. Last August, September was when we first started getting that. Come late December, early January, we really started getting inquiries related to people who have what some commonly refer to as long COVID, and those numbers just kept increasing over time. But anecdotally, we are hearing from employers, and our inquiries from individuals has increased in the last year as well. And again, it's a lot of people who don't really think of themselves as a person with a disability, but they're having their jobs in jeopardy, and they're reaching out, and we have to really convince them that, you know, the word disability in the Americans with Disabilities Act can be very helpful to you if you meet that definition and can show that you meet that definition. Again, I mean, the most important thing I can say probably is anecdotally, we are hearing from a lot of employers that they're getting more and more requests, yes. And we're thankful to ODEP for helping us shepherd through resources so that we can post on our website and provide individually to, again, make it a successful workplace for both that employer, that job applicant, and the employee. And I did just think of one other thing that I think might be important to add is Jennifer had referenced it earlier, how important mental health and you know, providing a safe place at work. Our inquiries related to mental health conditions were increasing prior to COVID, but certainly that trend continued, and we are seeing a lot more inquiries related to individuals who have mental health conditions. So it is a very, very important thing for employers to pay attention to in their workplace.
And thanks, Anne, for mentioning that. One of the resources that we do have that's been very popular is what we call our mental health toolkit. And it is it's several strategies for supporting employees at work and supporting mental wellness, supporting employees that have mental health conditions. It's divided into 4 categories. It's called the 4 A's, and I'm going to forget all 4, but it's accommodation, access, assistance, and something else. But it's a great toolkit, and I would encourage you to go to askern.org if you're interested in looking at those. And many of them were super easy to incorporate into a business unit or an agency or across an employer. Are you seeing any other questions, Wendy?
I don't have any more questions from the chat, but I am going to pause for just a moment to possibly turn it over to our division director, and that is Ms. Nancy A. Strike. I wanted to see if you had any anything that you would like to add as we close, Nancy. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, Wendy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. And I just wanted, again, very quickly to say thank you to our presenters. This has been a very informative session that we've had, particularly the information related to COVID and self-identification. North Carolina, the state of North Carolina is an employment first state now, and we are working diligently to improve our inclusion and accessibility issues associated with state government. And in addition, like many other states, we continue to work with novel and sometimes thought-provoking issues related with the ADA and COVID. As we spent a year last year trying to get people out of the workplace, and then we're spending a lot of time now working on getting folks back into the workplace. So all that being said, the information that you shared today and the discussion that we had has been very helpful for many of us. And on behalf of the state of North Carolina and the Office of State Human Resources, we want to thank each of you for taking time today out of your busy schedules to present this information and share your knowledge and experience with us. I'm certain that we will be back in touch as we have additional questions or need additional resources. But again, thank you for being with us this afternoon. We very much appreciate your time and information. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. And if there are no more questions, I'm going to take this opportunity to, again, thank our panelists and thank everyone within diversity and inclusion and diversity workforce services within the Office of State Human Resources, and also vocational rehabilitation services within DHHS. Again, thank you for attending this webinar, and we will have some information out about Disability Employment Awareness Month. Before you know it, that will be coming up in October. So look to hear for information concerning Disability Employment Awareness Month. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send your questions to me. My name is Wendy Wills, and I will make sure that I get the answers that you are seeking for those questions. And this is going to conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks for having us.